I used to think the mind couldn't break from fear alone. I was wrong. After 3 nights in that cabin, I don't trust my own eyes anymore. I still see them in corners of my room, those impossibly tall figures, those faces with no eyes, those mouths that shouldn't exist. Were they ever really there? Or did that place break something in my mind that can't be fixed? I don't know which answer scares me more. If you've experienced something that made you question reality itself, share your story in the comments. And if you want to hear more accounts like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Now, let me tell you what happened in those woods. My name is David, and I'm a freelance writer. I specialize in travel pieces and remote location reviews. Last November, I got hired by a vacation rental company to spend a few nights at a property they recently acquired in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. An old cabin that had been in the same family for over a century. They needed someone to write a compelling description for their listing, capture the authentic wilderness experience. The woman who hired me mentioned, almost casually, that the property had been difficult to sell. Something about local legends, stories from nearby towns about the woods being haunted. She laughed it off, said rural communities always had their ghost stories, especially about isolated places. I laughed along with her. I didn't believe in any of that superstitious nonsense. The pay was excellent, and I'd done similar assignments before. 3 nights alone, document everything. Write something that would make city people want to disconnect and experience nature. Simple work. I should have asked more about those local legends. The drive took most of the day, the last hour on a rough logging road that climbed steadily into dense forest. When I finally reached the cabin, the sun was already starting to set, casting long shadows through the massive pine trees that surrounded the clearing. The cabin was larger than I expected, built from dark timber that had aged to almost black. It sat at the edge of a small clearing, with the forest pressing in on all sides. There was something about the proportions that felt slightly wrong, like the windows were placed just a bit too high, or the door was narrower than it should be. Inside was surprisingly well maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, a comfortable bed in the corner, a small kitchen area, and a wooden table with 2 chairs. Solar panels provided electricity for lights and charging devices. A stack of firewood sat beside the fireplace. Everything I needed for a comfortable stay. But as I unpacked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cabin felt too quiet, not just from lack of sound, but like the space itself was holding its breath. The air was heavy, almost thick, and had a faint smell I couldn't quite identify. Not unpleasant, just ... wrong somehow. I started a fire in the fireplace as the last light faded. The wood crackled and popped, filling the cabin with warmth and that familiar smoky scent. I made dinner, set up my laptop, and tried to relax into the assignment. Outside, rain had started to fall, a gentle patter on the roof that should have been soothing. I sat at the table with my laptop, trying to write notes about the cabin's ambience. But I kept getting distracted, kept feeling like I should look over my shoulder. Around 10 o'clock, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the empty corner of the room, shadows dancing in the firelight. I told myself it was just the fire creating illusions, my eyes playing tricks in the dim light. But then it happened again. A flicker of movement near the bedroom area, tall, much taller than any person should be. A sense of something there, then gone when I looked directly at it. I stood up and checked the entire cabin, looking in corners, behind furniture, even opening the closet. Nothing. I was alone. I tried to laugh it off, blamed exhaustion from the long drive. I added more wood to the fire, wanting the light stronger, brighter. As I turned back to the table, I caught movement in the window, a reflection of something behind me, tall and thin, standing near the fireplace. I spun around, my heart racing. Nothing was there. But when I looked back at the window, I could still see it in the reflection. A figure, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long. It stood perfectly still, and even though it was just a reflection, I could feel it watching me. I stepped closer to the window, staring at the reflection. The figure didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, a dark shape in the firelight. I reached out slowly and touched the cold glass, and the moment my fingers made contact, the reflection vanished. My hands were shaking. I told myself to calm down. It was just my imagination, just stress and isolation playing with my perception. Maybe those local legends had gotten into my head more than I'd realized. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Throughout the evening, I kept seeing things in my peripheral vision. Shadows that were too tall, shapes that moved wrong, spaces that seemed to contain something until I looked directly at them. And always in reflections, in the windows, in the glass door of a cabinet, I'd catch glimpses of figures that shouldn't be there. Around midnight, I decided to try to sleep. I kept the fire going and left one lamp on. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain and the crackling fire. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. In the window across from my bed, reflected in the dark glass, a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Tall, at least 8 feet, maybe taller. Its body was thin, emaciated, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. And where its face should be, there was just smooth, dark surface. No eyes, no nose. Just a mouth, impossibly wide, stretched open in what might have been a smile or a scream. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was frozen, staring at this reflection of something that was supposedly standing right next to me, but was invisible when I looked directly at that spot. The figure's head tilted slowly, as if studying me. That terrible mouth opened wider, and though I heard no sound, I felt something. A vibration in my bones, a pressure in my skull. Then I blinked, and it was gone from the reflection. But the feeling of being watched remained. I sat up in bed and turned on every light in the cabin. I fed the fire until it was roaring, and I sat in the chair by the fireplace, refusing to look at any reflective surfaces, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. When dawn finally came, gray light filtering through the rain clouds, I felt exhausted but relieved. Daylight made everything seem less threatening, more explainable. I went outside to clear my head. The forest was silent, no birds singing, no signs of animals, just the dripping of water from the trees and that oppressive quiet. I walked around the cabin, and that's when I noticed the marks. Strange symbols scratched into the dirt at the edge of the clearing. Not random, but deliberate patterns that formed a rough circle around the cabin. They looked old, weathered, but still visible, like someone had been marking this place for a very long time. I photographed them, though I wasn't sure why. Some part of me knew I'd need proof later that this place was wrong. I spent the day trying to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. That figure in the reflection, that eyeless face, that mouth. As the sun began to set on my second night there, I realized those local legends might not have been superstition after all. Second night I made dinner, as the light faded, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. The rain had continued all day, sometimes lighter, sometimes heavier, but never stopping. The constant sound of water on the roof had become almost hypnotic. I started the fire early, wanting the light and warmth before full darkness arrived. The flames caught quickly, crackling and sending shadows dancing across the walls. I tried not to look at those shadows too closely, tried not to see the shapes they formed. As I ate, I noticed something strange. The windows were fogging up from the inside, condensation forming patterns on the glass. But the patterns weren't random. They looked almost like handprints. Long, thin handprints with too many fingers. I stood up and approached one of the windows, reaching out to wipe away the condensation. The moment my hand touched the glass, I saw them in the reflection. 3 figures standing behind me, tall, impossibly tall. Their bodies thin and angular, limbs hanging at wrong angles. And their faces, those smooth, eyeless faces with mouths stretched too wide. I spun around, my heart pounding. The cabin was empty, but when I looked back at the window, they were still there in the reflection. Standing perfectly still, those terrible mouths open, tilted heads pointed in my direction. I stumbled backward, my breathing rapid. This wasn't imagination. This was too detailed, too consistent. These things, whatever they were, existed somehow in reflections, in spaces between what was real and what wasn't. Throughout the evening, they appeared and disappeared, always in reflections, in windows, in the glass door of a cabinet, in the screen of my laptop when it went dark. Sometimes just one, sometimes several, always watching, always with those mouths open. and I started to notice something else. The cabin was getting colder, despite the fire burning hot. My breath began to fog, and I could see frost forming on the inside of the windows, creeping across the glass in spiderweb patterns. Around 9 o'clock, something changed. I was sitting at the table, trying desperately to focus on anything other than the figures I could see in every reflective surface, when one of them appeared differently. Not in a reflection this time, but in my peripheral vision. Standing in the corner of the room, partially visible, flickering like a bad signal. I didn't turn my head. I kept staring straight ahead, but I could see it there at the edge of my vision. Tall and thin, that eyeless face turned toward me, and as I watched without looking directly, it became more solid, more real. It was like they needed me not to look at them directly, like direct observation made them retreat, but peripheral vision, reflected images. That's where they could exist more fully. My hands were shaking. I slowly turned my head toward the corner, and as I did, the figure faded. By the time I was looking directly at it, there was nothing there, just an empty corner. But the cold remained, and that sense of presence, stronger than ever. I decided to test something. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera, pointing it at the empty corner. On the screen, I could see the room through the camera lens. And there, clear as day on the screen, was the figure, standing in the corner, watching me through the phone's camera. My blood ran cold. The screen showed what my eyes couldn't see directly. These things existed in captured images, in reflections, in anything that showed reality indirectly. I lowered the phone, my mind reeling. How was this possible? What were these things? As if responding to my thoughts, all the windows suddenly showed them. Dozens of reflections, figures pressed against the glass from outside. All those eyeless faces pointed at the cabin, all those mouths open wide. It was like they'd surrounded the building, a silent army of impossible things. The rain intensified, water hammering on the roof, and through the storm, I thought I heard something. Not quite a sound, but a vibration. Like they were humming, but at a frequency just below human hearing. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. I sat in the center of the room, as far from windows and reflective surfaces as I could get, my eyes fixed on the fire. But even in the flames, I could see shapes. Tall, thin silhouettes dancing in the orange light. Around midnight, one of them appeared in the room with me. Not in a reflection this time, not in my peripheral vision, but standing directly in front of me, between me and the fireplace. Partially transparent, flickering, but undeniably there. I could see through it to the fire beyond, but I could also see it clearly. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its skin was gray and rough, like bark or stone. Its limbs were grotesquely elongated, arms that reached past its knees, fingers that were too long and had too many joints. And that face, God, that face. Smooth and eyeless, no nose, just that mouth stretched impossibly wide, showing rows of teeth inside that shouldn't fit. We stared at each other, me and this impossible thing. I could feel its attention on me, even without eyes to see with. It knew I was there. It knew I was terrified. Then it raised one long arm and pointed at me with a finger that had too many segments. The mouth opened wider, and I heard that vibration again, stronger now, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. The figure began to solidify, becoming more opaque, more real. The more I looked at it, the more substantial it became, as if my observation was feeding it, giving it power to manifest fully. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to look, and when I opened them again, it was gone. But I could still feel it there, watching from somewhere I couldn't see. The rest of the night was torment. They appeared everywhere, in every reflection, in every shadow. Sometimes transparent, sometimes almost solid. Always watching, always with those mouths open, showing those terrible teeth. And they were getting bolder, staying visible longer, becoming more substantial with each appearance. By the time dawn came, I was exhausted and terrified. The rational part of my brain had completely shut down. These things were real, or as real as anything could be. They existed in some space between seen and unseen, and this cabin, this place, was where that boundary was thinnest. I should have left, should have run to my truck and never looked back, but something kept me there. Pride, stubbornness, or maybe something else. Maybe they wanted me to stay. Maybe they'd been influencing my thoughts all along. As the sun rose and the rain finally stopped, I realized with growing dread that I had one more night. One more night with these things, and I had a terrible feeling that tonight they wouldn't just watch anymore. Third night, the rain had stopped, but somehow that made everything worse. The silence was total and oppressive. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. I knew what was coming. I could feel it building, could sense something shifting in the air around me. Tonight would be different. Tonight, they wouldn't stay in reflections and shadows. Tonight, they would be real. I prepared as best I could, every light on fire, roaring. I sat at the table with my car keys in my pocket, ready to run. But deep down, I wondered if running would even matter. If these things wanted me, would locked doors and distance really stop them? They appeared at dusk, before full darkness had even fallen. All the windows showed them simultaneously. Dozens of figures pressed against the glass from outside, surrounding the cabin completely. Those eyeless faces all turned toward me, those impossible mouths all open wide. And this time, I could see them outside too, not just in reflections. Tall shapes between the trees, moving slowly toward the cabin. They were coming. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, my heart hammering. This was really happening. They were actually coming for me. The first one appeared inside the cabin around 7 o'clock, standing near the door, more solid than I'd ever seen before. Its gray, bark-like skin looked rough and cracked, bits of something dark oozing from the crevices. Its limbs hung at those wrong angles, fingers scraping the floor. And that face, that terrible eyeless face, with the mouth stretched wide, showing rows of needle-thin teeth that glistened wet in the firelight. It tilted its head, studying me, and even without eyes, I felt its gaze like a physical weight. Then, a second one appeared, near the window, then a third by the fireplace. They were manifesting fully now, crossing over from whatever space they normally inhabited into the physical world. I backed toward the center of the room, surrounded. My mind was screaming at me to run, but I was trapped. They stood between me and every exit. The first one took a step toward me. Its movement was wrong, joints bending backward, limbs swinging loosely. But it was deliberate, purposeful. It was hunting. What do you want? My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. The mouth opened wider, if that was possible, and a sound came out. Not a voice, but a vibration that I felt more than heard. It resonated in my chest, in my skull, making my vision blur and my ears ring. The other two joined in, all three of them making that terrible sound. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, pattern. They were communicating, or singing, or doing something I couldn't understand. As the vibration intensified, I saw something that made my stomach drop. More of them were appearing, materializing from nothing, stepping out of shadows and reflections into solid form. 5, 7, 10. The cabin was filling with these impossible creatures, all of them surrounding me, all of them making that sound that made my bones ache. And then, suddenly, the cabin changed. The walls seemed to shimmer and shift, and I was seeing it differently. Layers of time overlapping, showing me the past and present simultaneously. I saw people who had been here before, other visitors, other foolish souls who'd stayed in this cursed place. I saw a man from maybe the 1950s, backing away from the same creatures, his face twisted in terror. I saw him run for the door, saw them follow, saw him make it outside before they dragged him down. His screams echoed across decades. I saw a couple from more recent times, maybe the 90s, holding each other as the creatures surrounded them. Saw the moment the creatures touched them, saw their bodies convulse and their eyes go blank. I saw others, many others, all of them trapped by these things, all of them consumed or driven mad or worse. This cabin was a trap, a thin place where these creatures could cross over, and anyone who stayed too long became their prey. The vision faded, and I was back in the present, surrounded by at least a dozen of these things, all of them closing in slowly. The largest one, the first to appear, reached out toward me with those two long fingers. I could see each joint, could count 5 segments where there should only be 3. The tips ended in something like claws, black and sharp. It touched my shoulder, and the moment it made contact, I felt cold like I'd never felt before. A cold that went beyond physical, that reached into my mind and my soul. I could feel it trying to pull something out of me, trying to take something essential. And in that moment of contact, I understood. These things fed on fear, on life force, on the energy of living beings. The cabin was their hunting ground, and they'd learned over centuries how to terrify their prey, how to break minds before taking what they wanted. But understanding didn't save me. The creature's grip tightened, and I felt myself weakening, felt my thoughts becoming foggy. Around me, the other creatures moved closer, their mouths opening wider, that vibration growing louder. Something inside me snapped. Pure survival instinct took over. I broke free from the creature's grip and ran. Not toward the door, they were blocking that, but toward the window. I grabbed the chair I'd been sitting in and swung it with all my strength at the glass. The window shattered, and cold air rushed in. I didn't think. I just dove through the broken window, feeling glass cut my arms and face, feeling those cold hands grab at me from behind. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and scrambled to my feet. Behind me, I could see them pouring out of the cabin, those tall figures, moving with that horrible jerking gait, coming after me. I ran for my truck, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I could hear them behind me, could hear that vibration they made getting closer. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, managed to unlock the door, threw myself inside. The engine started on the first try. Thank God, thank God. I threw it into reverse and hit the gas, not caring about the rough road, just needing to get away. In the rearview mirror, I could see them standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me go, not chasing anymore. They didn't need to. They had their hunting ground. They would wait for the next person. There would always be a next person. I drove through the night, hands gripping the wheel, checking the mirror constantly, terrified I'd see one of them in the back seat or reflected in the glass. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm home now, safe in my apartment, but I'm not okay. I can't sleep without every light on. I can't look at reflections without seeing them standing behind me. And sometimes, late at night, I feel that cold touch on my shoulder and hear that vibration in my bones. I don't know if they followed me or if they're still at that cabin, waiting. I know if what I experienced was real or if that place broke something in my mind that couldn't be fixed. What I do know is that cabin should be burned to the ground. Those woods should be avoided. And those local legends I didn't believe in. They were trying to warn me. Some places are thin. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. And some things hunt in the spaces between what we can see and what we can't. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more true horror experiences and hit that like button. Your support helps me share these encounters and maybe, just maybe, warn others before they make the same mistakes.